And just like that, our first of many 4-game slates of the World Cup has come to an end. And like I said yesterday, my plan throughout these 4-game slates is to go a little bit quicker on each match, have things be more concise because obviously there's a lot more football to cover and a lot more things to get through, and I don't want this to turn into a 40-50 minute video. And with that, let's get straight into it. We're going to Group B with Qatar against Switzerland. Now heading into this one, I was expecting a dominant display from Switzerland. They are the favorites to go through in first place in this group, and Qatar obviously probably looked at by many, including myself, as not a real threat in this tournament. And on the surface, you could say that it was exactly that for Switzerland. These guys had 68% of the possession, outshot Qatar by 20, completed double the amount of passes, and overall just massively controlled it. However, throughout the game, it really felt like Switzerland became less and less threatening, and they seemed more happy with sticking with the result that they had, which they got in the first place in the 17th minute. Now, even to this point, there were still a lot of questions surrounding whether that play was a penalty. The challenge itself was obviously one thing, and in that case, that's a penalty every time. But on a couple of the other angles, this definitely looked pretty close, if not pretty much an offside. Now, I don't know if since then this has been confirmed by anyone. I know they did VAR checks and they said nothing was wrong, but there wasn't really a specific VAR check that seemed like that was the case for an offside. And with that becomes the first of many controversial penalty calls in this tournament. But fortunately for the Swiss, they were able to take advantage of that as Briel and Bolo put them up 1-0. I'm starting to think a lot of this Switzerland team, just because they made the World Cup so much over the last couple of years, they're becoming players that you just associate with when it comes to the World Cup. Players like Briel and Bolo, Ricardo Rodriguez still going at left back. But as I mentioned in my preview about Switzerland is that throughout the years, they've been adding so many more guys to this fold. Well, you do have your usual suspects, as I just mentioned, including guys like Manuel Akanji and there's Zakaria, who played his game at right back. But in the midfield, it's not just the presence of Granit Xhaka when you have Abisher and Ralf Freuler alongside of them. And as mentioned in the attack, Dan Ndoye, Ruben Vargas as well. I think those two had solid games, but again, for Switzerland, I know this has kind of been a recurring theme throughout a couple of these World Cup videos, especially yesterday's with talking about Canada. But this was even more apparent today with Switzerland. Unlike Canada, where they were trying to chase the game the whole time, trying to get that all-important first goal, this was a case where Switzerland had the 1-goal lead and had so many opportunities to build upon that. And they just never took them. A part of it is down to the Swiss themselves, but we also have to give a huge amount of credit to Mahmoud Abunada, who absolutely stood on his head for Qatar. He was pretty much their only bright spot throughout basically this entire game up until the last couple of minutes. And Qatar have him to thank alone for potentially saving their World Cup. Because without him, this could have easily been a 4-5-0 game, in all honesty. And as the game went on and Switzerland struggled to get that next goal, you started to wonder if there was any little moment that could potentially cost Switzerland here. And that is exactly what happened in the very last minute of the game. With captain Qatar himself, Boualem Kouki, heading it towards the goal. It would go down as an own goal in the end, but regardless, Qatar get their shining moment at the World Cup. Unlike Canada, where it took them 7 games to get their first point in the World Cup, it only took Qatar 4 games to do so. And with that, this group gets very interesting. Qatar looks a lot more threatening than we thought they would, and Switzerland maybe don't look as threatening as we all thought. And with that, through one match day, the entirety of Group B is tied completely. Same goal, same points, same result, everything. I mean, counting in, many people called this the group of life. And so far through one game, that is exactly the case. Every team has that opportunity to make a statement in the World Cup. Now, if you're Switzerland in this situation, where do you go from here? One thing that I didn't mention about Switzerland that I probably should have mentioned before is that heading into this tournament, this team wasn't exactly in the strongest of states. In their last warm-up friendly, they drew 1-1 with Australia. Looking back, this doesn't seem so bad now considering what Australia just did. But regardless, after that game, Granit Xhaka went to the media and publicly scolded his team for their efforts. Now, on one hand, Granit Xhaka, he has that tendency, right? He has this tendency of an unhinged player saying what's on his mind, not afraid to call anyone out. And while the Switzerland camp did come out and say that they've sorted out this manner, I'm not so sure about that anymore. Simpson's team morale has definitely taken a massive hit by not winning this game. And with that, now they have a tough matchup against Bosnia, a team that we saw how it was against Canada. They were really hard to break down, and they can be clinical and take their opportunities. And heck, if Bosnia can get a potential healthy Edin Dzeko, that could change things. And again, for Qatar, this is an absolutely massive result that easily puts them in play. And if you are Canada in this situation, let this game be a lesson for you. If you don't put your chances away in this next game, Qatar are going to make you pay. Now moving on to one of the most anticipated games of this early group stage matches, and that is Brazil against Morocco in Group C. It's rare to see a matchup like this come so early with two teams both within the top 10 of the rankings. And in a way, they both kind of contrast. Brazil is a team that has those high standards but have been really falling recently, while Morocco is a team that is pretty much on the rise. And right from the jump, Morocco had their grip all over this game. Now in the preview, I talked a little bit about Morocco, comparing their team from 2022 to 2026 and how since then they've gotten some big acquisitions. One of them that I mentioned was, of course, Brahim Diaz, who got things going with an absolutely brilliant ball, and then Saibari with the chip finish, probably the best goal we've seen so far at this World Cup. That put Morocco up 1-0. And from this point, I was starting to get really worried about Brazil. They started off that game pretty poorly. But the one thing that Brazil teams always have going for them is, of course, the high-end talent. And today we finally saw Vinicius Jr. have his crowning moment with the Brazil team, taking it upon himself on that one, making the move and the finish side netting. That put Brazil level within 10 minutes after Morocco's first goal. From there, the game kind of played out as I thought it would going into this tournament. Both teams would get a crack at each other, but overall, both teams didn't really have too many great chances. Morocco obviously had a great one at the end, which Alisson came up huge for. But the second half played out relatively normally as both teams settled for the 1-1 draw, which means that from here on out, it's going to come down to the results against Haiti and Scotland that will pretty much decide who goes 1 and 2 in this group. Now, a few more things I want to highlight here is one of the things I was really looking forward to seeing was the duel between Vinicius Jr. and Achraf Hakimi. Overall, I would say Hakimi got the better of majority of the exchanges. It's actually crazy how much of an impact Hakimi really makes on this team as a right back. But obviously, Vinny was still able to get his moment with a goal. Hakimi really wasn't a part of that, but still, Hakimi did his job on that end. And overall for Brazil, I think a point for them in this game is pretty fair. They weren't really that impressive throughout this one. In particular, Rafinha did not look like his strongest at all. Ancelotti starting Igor Thiago up top was also a very questionable decision, and one that absolutely did not pay off. And also the midfield of Casemiro and Bruno, I think, has to change going forward. Casemiro in particular just looked a step behind everyone. But like I said, these next two games are going to be very important for Brazil. They got to get things together by then. They got to put in some good performances and really get their confidence and their mojo back heading into the knockout stages. And as for Morocco, to think that this team could be potentially better than the one that we saw in 2022 is a crazy thing to think about. Now, I talked about one addition of Brahim Diaz, about how key he's going to be for them, but there's another guy that Morocco has had in since then in the midfield. It's a player that since the game, everybody has been talking about. And it's an 18-year-old playing in Lille, Ayoub Bouadi. He was awesome in the midfield, absolutely controlling the game throughout it. And I highlight this also because this also just displays how the Morocco team has evolved. With the recent hiring of Coach Mohamed Ouabi, a coach that took Morocco to huge success in their youth levels, his expertise and having trust in these young guys to come in and make an impact on the senior team, that is what's going to carry Morocco really far over these next couple of years. At this point, they've actually developed themselves to be a massive nation in football. One that can easily make an impact in the next couple of World Cups. And in that sense, they're really pioneers because usually the toughest of World Cup teams come out of Europe and South America. But for them, they could be a genuine giant out of Africa. And this might not be just a golden generation for them like it has been for a couple of other teams over the years. With the way things are going, and with a guy like Bouadi who they can come in and be their next guy up, and plenty more in the system, this is the start of something very special for them. And something very special for Bouadi as well. I've seen so many things after the game, but many clubs want to sign him now. So shout out to him. He might be an early candidate for this year's young player of the tournament, especially if Morocco have another impressive tournament. But overall, like I said, this game played out sort of exactly how I thought it would be. Brazil not looking their best, but still getting somewhat of a result out of it. And good to see Vinny Jr. getting on the board as well. I didn't think we'd really see that until the next couple of games, but for him to get going now, he looks really confident so far. So that'll be something great for Brazil to take into these next couple of games. But plenty of changes should be made because there were a lot of things that did not look right today. Now moving on to Haiti against Scotland, the other match in Group C. Now this was a massive game for both teams. If both teams want to give themselves a chance to get out of this group, this was the game where they had to take all 3 points. And as much as Scotland were easily the favorite in this one, knowing their World Cup history, you could not doubt anything. But 30 minutes in, John McGinn delivered the long-awaited moment for the Scots as he got them their first World Cup goal since 1998, firing in off the rebound as he gave Scotland the lead. And to think this was his first goal for the national team since November of 2024 couldn't have been a bigger moment for not only the team, but for himself breaking the duck. From there, Scotland was just able to hang on. Haiti had a couple of great chances. Providence late in the first half in particular had easily Haiti's best chance of the game. But Scotland did what they had to do. They knew how important getting this first win was, getting those 3 points, setting themselves up in a great position. Now, it would have been better for them if they got maybe another goal or two, considering the opponents that are ahead of them. Either way, you take the 3 points, and you want to try to get at least a draw in one of those 2 games. But regardless, it's great to see Scotland, and obviously their fans, they were going absolutely crazy in this one. That's crazy to think about. At this point through one game, Scotland have the lead in Group C, ahead of Brazil and Morocco. So drink it all in, Scotland fans, because who knows, this could be your time finally to get out of the group stage. And now on to the last game of the day. It only took place at 12 a.m. Eastern, which was Australia against Turkiye in Group D. Now, what did I say about Turkey in my last video? I said that every time this team has expectations, they always fold. And it happened again in this first game. Yes, I understand they didn't have a healthy Kenan Yildiz, but regardless of that, I'm very disappointed in Turkey with this game. I mean, the only real chances they resorted to in the first part of the game were just the long shots. Don't get me wrong, they came close on a lot of them, especially with Arda Güler, but regardless, they just could not get past Australia, and they paid the price. Australia's counterattack in this one was absolutely lethal, and that's exactly what we saw in the first goal, with Nestori Arinkunda putting the Australians up early, and from there, all eyes turned to their last line of defense in Patrick Beach. Today's really been a big performance of the goalkeepers. We talked about Qatar earlier today, but Australia's Beach had an absolutely incredible performance of his own, making 8 crucial saves and a huge clean sheet. As no matter what Turkey tried, whether it was long shots, set pieces, they just could not figure him out. And once again, Turkey cost themselves with a giveaway in the midfield that set up the second Australian goal scored by Connor Metcalf. To put it simply, Australia was just more clinical in this game. Turkey had 30 shots in this game, but only 8 on target. And to think that this is an Australia team made up of 10 players who had never played a World Cup game, to go out and perform the way they did, absolutely impressive for them. Shout out to Tony Popovich for how he set everything up. Perfectly done, well executed. Australia get a massive 3 points in that group. That sets them up brilliantly in their next match where they play the US. So even if things don't go exactly right in that one, all they got to do is get probably at least a point in that Paraguay game. And now Turkey faced a absolutely huge game, pretty much a tournament deciding game for both them and Paraguay. Hopefully by then they can get a healthy Kenan Yildiz, but otherwise this could be another forgettable tournament for Turkey, one where once again they had the expectations of at least winning the group. Now they might even not do that. But again, shout out to Australia for that game. I said that there could be a threat in this tournament. They're usually that sort of sneaky team. That was the case in 2022. No one really gave them a chance. This was sort of the same thing heading into this one, and they've already made a massive statement. And that's pretty much it for day 3 of the World Cup. Like I said yesterday, this is when the real World Cup starts. You got 4 games in one day, 12 hours of football. It just gets absolutely crazy. And it's going to be the same thing again with this one. We're going to see Germany and the Netherlands get their tournaments on board. An Ivory Coast Ecuador game that'll be absolutely crazy. And so much more to come. It's only 3 days in, but man, this is just so much fun. Once again, for daily World Cup content, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we go on to day 4. Let's play football.